This is the Real Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Filliol. Today I'm joined by former athlete and now coach Katie Zaferes. In this discussion, we walk through Katie's journey into coaching from being a professional athlete for many years and drawing on her experiences and progression through the rankings to ultimately becoming world champion in 2019 and a double Olympic medalist in Tokyo, and how she unpicks what the behind the scenes work of coaching is that is often invisible to athletes, the nuances involved, how she wants to build a supportive training environment based on not only her experiences, but what she observed from training partners and from programs around the world. She talks about the goals of the project based in North Carolina, where she's living, how she's managing both the facilities, the local resources, what might be different compared to her own experiences, given what is available and what it will benefit the athletes that she's going to be working with most. She talks about the initial stages of her coaching philosophy: simplicity, sustainability, trying to find ways to foster athlete independence, and connecting back to her experiences from a training group and holistic approach, and how does she put athlete growth and well-being first and foremost, and that's the title of or the name of her group is the AUXO Collective, which means growth, and it's a perfect example of Katie's own experience, and it's a fascinating look into building a program from the fundamentals and where she can go with it. It's really been interesting to see this process and to support her in the background as part of the development. And I'm confident she'll be successful because she possesses the quality of being able to ask questions and seek support. And I think many coaches around the world that I've had exposure to, in fact, struggle with this. And perhaps they feel that asking questions will make them look like they don't have enough information or knowledge. But of course, being curious and being open to information and being open to support is our qualities that the best coaches possess. So I think in this way, I'm sure Katie will be successful in this new path, and I certainly reflect in my experience how rare it was that athletes and coaches, in particular, coaches and support staff that I've worked with, seem reluctant to ask questions about, even athletes like Katie. I can count on maybe one hand the number of times that coaches that I work with or are part of organizations that, tell me about what's gone into Katie's success or her progression to world champion, Olympic medalist, or the same kind of maybe fear or difficulty asking questions. Tell me about Mario Mola's progression or Vincent Louis' progression. What can we learn from them? I think often we put up these barriers to being open and learning from others, and certainly I think the examples that I can think of organizations and culture, which I often end up talking about, are organizations that behave as though they have all the answers already, and certainly don't, are not open to seeking understanding and information from outside their organization. But in fact, I can see, and I knew this already from coaching Katie for so many years, that she possessed that openness, that questioning, that curiosity, and also zeroing in on how she wants to operate and what she's learned from her experiences from a system point of view, from observing great training partners, from what the differences between the group that she trained in for so many years, but also what she's also observed and what will make sense most for her environment. So great conversation with Katie, and I look forward to hearing what she says. But before we go on into that conversation with Katie, you can support the podcast number one way to support the podcast is if you're interested in athletes being coached. It is a one-to-one relationship. You can contact me. I think my favored way to work is trying to find simplicity in complexity and distilling down my experience with some of the top athletes in the world and how to apply that to ambitious athletes competing in all distances. You can also sign up for consulting if you just want to have a look at your program, season plan, periodization, get some feedback on that. And finally, there's opportunities to spend some one-to-one time this year in my training camps in the northwest of France. And I'll link below and how you can sign up to spend a week together in good training, good discussion, great food, and to enjoy that experience. And finally, coaches can be involved in either mentorship or support. It's a small sport, a young sport, and there's not a lot of opportunities to learn and grow. And that's something I really enjoy doing, is speaking to coaches and supporting them through their process. So coaches, feel free to get in contact. And finally, if you found value in the podcast, leave a comment, share with somebody that might benefit. Value for value is our model. Thank you. Right, Katie. So I want to start with the same quote I gave to Drew Box, who is at a different stage of his development into coaching, but it's by the tennis player Andy Murray, who has gone from a whole career of playing to now coaching. And he says, it's been a bit more demanding than I was expecting. There's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes that I didn't really appreciate. I wish I would have known that when I was playing. Maybe I would have been a bit easier to work with. So when you hear that quote, sort of how do you reflect on what is quite early days into your new journey and your new project?
I think it resonates in the sense that there is so much like nuances to coaching that I'm definitely learning, and it's not necessarily like the big picture items, it's more like the smaller things. I would like to think that I did appreciate and like have a bit more awareness in general. So like as for like the difficult, like may have been easier to work with. I don't know, you might be able to speak to it more, but I considered myself like the coachable athlete, or in the sense of I don't think I would have been easier to work with knowing it, but I think just like having even more of a gratitude for the things that weren't so obvious to me. There's like, I mean, I messaged you like a week or two ago because it was crummy weather in North Carolina, which really isn't that crummy, and like standing on the pool deck, and like as an athlete, you know when it's crummy weather, you experience it, but you're not just standing there. You're like getting on with it, doing something. Like, wow, like just like standing and not having it reflect how miserable you are. like on the like just being in that condition and not communicating it to the athletes. Like I think that's something I definitely appreciate a lot more, is how little, well, you never complained about about your side of things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, when I read that, I think it's the stuff behind the scenes that I start to think about, because of course your job when you're an athlete is to do the work. It's to focus on yourself and deliver what you're meant to deliver. But yeah, it's all the behind the scenes. I'm not sure that it would make someone necessarily easier to work with, having thought about that, because yeah, those are the challenges. But yeah, I had to laugh when you sent that message. I mean, you don't really think about it, do you? But I reflect back before the Commonwealth Games, way back in 2006. It was very early in the year, and we were doing a lot of motor pacing at the time, and this was in Victoria and British Columbia and Canada. And I remember just being frozen on this motorcycle and for hours and hours, and put all the clothes you have, and you just don't generate any heat while you're riding along on the bike, generating a lot of heat. But yeah, so you're in the early days, but let's talk about your new project. So how did this come about? What is it called, and just the origin story of this new journey?
So I retired in, I guess it was October of last year, 2024, and I didn't well, before last year, I wouldn't say I necessarily knew what my next step was, but an opportunity arose through a partnership that USA Triathlon and like the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee have with basically UNC, or University of North Carolina, Charlotte. It's a US performance center. And we could do a daily training environment here. And obviously, like being with you and being under you as your athlete, like I know how valuable the daily training environment is. And that was also, so when I got recruited for triathlon, I came from like a Division I running background with a background in swimming. And so we also then went straight into a daily training environment. And I just thought it really accelerated my growth as an athlete at the beginning stages, and then obviously continuing throughout my entire career. And it was honestly probably something that I struggled with the most when I became a mom, was that when I was still trying to be an athlete, I wasn't in the daily training environment quite as much. And I think having that comparison from knowing my whole career I thrived in it to like now trying to adapt and figure out my way without it. I don't even think I ever figured it out really. I mean, we did like small camps for a month, but it made me just want to be able to provide that for more athletes and more athletes in the United States, because there are just so few options for daily training environments here in the US that are like high performance and actually daily, seen with each other. And so that really, I mean, most of the reason this project came about is because my experience was so good and I wanted other people to have that experience and just have the accessibility to it, I think, because I think there's more options of daily training environments outside, like in Europe or just outside our country than here.
So in the US, we have Project Podium, run by Parker Spencer, has been one for a while that's been out there. Way back when there used to be a daily training environment in Colorado Springs, but it's been more than 10 years since there was that. Is this like a new direction, do you think, for USAT? I mean, I guess it's a partnership, first to say, like between USAT, the organization in University of Charlotte, and the High Performance Center. But what is how does this sort of fit into the bigger picture in your view in the US?
It's recognizing that there's not so many options for our athletes to train here, especially so like Parker has the men, because there's NCAA or collegiate women's triathlon, and that's a sport for us. So Parker's Project Podium, it came about because there wasn't that option for men. And even still, I feel like when you're in college, it's not necessarily the same daily training environment as, say, when you graduate, or like the ones that we experience, because the idea for like AUXO Collective is like you're focused on triathlon and school would be more on the side. Like you can still do classes, you could still do like a very small part-time job, but the idea is that the primary focus is triathlon, draft legal triathlon. And so I think for just the US in general, it's having more options for athletes, because right now what I recognize is there's this gap, because we don't really have a pipeline that's just through and through. I think that's changing and it's really exciting, and a lot because of daily training environments, but also just not having a gap in criteria and funding and things like that. So this is an option so that when you're done with college, it's like you can still potentially, if you would like to commit to it, continue doing triathlon in an environment.
Mm-hmm. And I remember when we started working together, it was, you had sort of graduated from the CRP program at the time, and I recall you had like a decision to make of where you were going to go at the time. But if I recall correctly, there wasn't really like a USAT option then. It was, here's a bunch of coaches and programs around the world that might be interesting to you. So this is sort of a change of direction a bit to have what you're doing now to build it up.
For sure. And I think when I was like graduating the program, there was, with the collegiate recruitment program, there were maybe daily training environment. Like I talked to Siri Lindley, I talked to like Cliff English before talking to you, and obviously there's a lot of reasons I went to you, but one of them being all of the athletes were focused primarily on World Triathlon, and well, you had like, I remember thinking of, I think it was Edmonton of 2013 or 2014, and I was like, oh, if I would have been in the squad, we would have had like 4 or 5 in the top 10 or like something like that. And I was just thinking, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good squad right there. So, so I think that's a big part of it, is especially, and just in the US in general, world triathlon racing, draft legal racing isn't quite as well known or popular, I would say, still as non-draft.
And most people listening to this wouldn't know, but last year I came out to Charlotte, and we did driven, I think, by Tommy, a coach development course that had a mix of coaches, a number of whom are in the NC2A program that we're trying. I guess the focus was on developing DTEs, but it remains kind of a big challenge, doesn't it, for a number of reasons. And so, how do you sort of observe that? Like, how do you, what you're doing? What are you trying to do differently? Is it the fact that it's post collegiate focus, so it's not based on necessarily the same constraints? Because I mean, again, maybe people don't realize, but NC2A programs have kind of strict limits on the amount of like coach time that you can have and the seasons, and there's quite a lot of kind of administrative and education focused constraints where well, something to deal with, I suppose. But so what you're doing is the step after that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. I mean, I would say we're open to athletes who potentially want to be like committed to triathletes or committed to triathlon earlier on. So like basically athletes 18 and over could be a part of our group. But I think I see it more as something that athletes are doing post collegiately, filling that gap. And I would say would be like the primary focus, because I think there's still a lot of people want to have that college experience first.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of US culture, isn't it? And it's a big, resource. I mean, I guess maybe it's unsure exactly the place that the collegiate program will go in terms of a development pathway. I think it's still probably early days because of just the particulars about the way it is, the short season. It doesn't overlap so much with the international season. There's a lot of things that would be interesting to see how it progresses as a pathway. But so you're starting a new program based on where you are, and I know it's pretty challenging to start something from scratch. So how have you gone about that in the first steps? What things did you have to put in place? What order did you do them in? How did you approach this challenge?
I think I had a great idea, and then when it came to fruition, there was a little bit of a panic. I think I reached out to you, being like, "Oh my gosh, am I so far in over my head?" Because I think I identified it. Actually, like I found this slideshow that I'd written like years ago about how I thought this area would be, once we moved here in 2021, how I thought this area would be very good for a daily training environment, just because of the amount of resources it had, and actually a lot just because of pool access. I feel like that's a really big limiter for a group. And so I had the idea and I was like, okay, great. I actually started it probably, my retirement was shorter than I anticipated, in the sense that like pretty much I retired from triathlon and then from racing myself, and then started trying to get this ready. And it was like recruiting athletes, trying to figure out logistically all of like, not just, and it wasn't primarily focused on learning how to be a coach, but it was also trying to find housing and figure out like the US Performance Center, the relationship with them, and then just like budgeting and all these things that I was like, oh my goodness, I've never done before. But thankfully I have I reached out to you a lot. I reached out to, I mean, US, like USA Triathlon in general has been really supportive of just like helping me. Ryan Bolton and Parker, who are both our coaches here and have done it themselves already. Like that was really, really helpful. And obviously just learning a lot from other people. Like, again, I guess it's almost the same as starting in an athlete in a new environment. Like you're learning a lot from other people's mistakes, and they're like sharing, okay, like here's some things I wish I would have known when I started the program. And so that was really from basically November is when I got hired by USA Triathlon, and right after we sent out the application for AUXO, and then December we were like trying to go through the applicants and figure out athletes. And also at the same time I was learning I was pregnant and like trying to navigate that aspect of it, because while I was super excited, it was also hard because I felt like I was keeping this secret, but I wasn't ready to share it with athletes we were recruiting, and I felt it impacted them. And so that was like a whole nother side of it that just added, I think once I actually communicated with the athletes after like I felt comfortable to do so, having that off my chest, it was like such a bigger relief than what I thought it would be, just to like continue going forward, knowing that no one was like, oh, nope, I don't want to be a part of it anymore. So it was definitely just going fully into it, committed and not necessarily like learning a lot on the go, I think.
So you mentioned it's a great pool you've got there. So I've been out there, wonderful pool, indoor and outdoor and everything, and they managed to keep it nice and warm, and even in the winter, which was just super. But you talked about the application process. So what have you sort of learned on the first round of having gone through that? Like I imagine you've got a wide range of people interested. How have you thought about that, and maybe what might you evolve to at the next steps there?
So originally when we created AUXO Collective, AUXO means growth, and the idea is for athletes to like grow through the program, but really similar to what I experienced in the sense of it's a starter program. In this, we didn't expect athletes to be here for long term, and the idea was that they grow out of it and we move them on then to the next daily training environment. And that's definitely evolved in the last few months, not even months, I would say like weeks, because in general, I've always respected the Leads program a lot. And one of the things I always loved about it was how, at least from the outside point of view, there were just athletes that it was the whole pipeline in one spot, in the sense that you had athletes who were development athletes all the way up to their highest performing athletes at national level, Olympic level. And so in my head, I just really like that model. I think just in general, I've experienced when I came into triathlon and was competing with Sarah True and Gwen Jorgensen, like I was lifted up because of what they were achieving. And so that's how I see the aspect when you have development athletes to the highest, you're seeing what the highest level of athletes are doing. And at the same time, athletes who are developing still hold their own skill sets that can be quite valuable as you're training. And I felt that like a lot of my training partners, especially when we're here and when I wasn't with the group, they weren't elite. Well, they weren't like professional athletes. They were like group ride, like mid 40s, mid 50s strong men on the bike, like, or Tommy. And not saying like Tommy obviously got to like World Cup podium level, but like he was one of my best training partners. And so when I went to Leeds, it just reaffirmed that and more for me. And so I think that's how my vision has changed. And it's not in like immediate action right now, because I don't think we've been able to think through it enough or kind of hash out every aspect of that, because it takes obviously more support with different coaches and things like that. But what I was so surprised about with Leeds was it was even more intertwined than I had imagined, in the sense that they have their development athletes, they have their what do they call it, like funded, they're more funded athletes, or their performance team. And then swimming, it's like a little bit separated mainly just because of lane space, but Jess Learmonth is swimming with the development boys, and like it's so cool to see. And she likes it. She gets a lot of value out of it. And obviously those younger boys or men also get a lot of value out of that. And then they went to do a run session, and it was like a fartlek session or something like that. And I was like, okay, they're going to go into like group A, group B, group C. No, it was like a mass start of 30 athletes. And the way it worked out was just so neat to watch. And I was only there for like 3 days. So the training aspect, what they're doing, that's not something that like was the biggest interest to me, and wasn't something I was able to like get a hold on really in just like 3 days of that. But it was just how things were structured, and how you could tell that athletes benefited from being in that environment, and they were committed. So to be a part of the development team, like you had to go to 4 swims, 4 runs, 4 rides a week. So that's like, I mean, they're doing 20 some hours of training with that. So there was like a threshold session I saw, and I was like, man, if I was there, I would have been like, ooh, like it was a hard one. And no one, not any of the athletes, like even like they just got on with it. And also to your point with why I think this was like a little bit further back in the conversation, but with how the US has its challenges with daily training environments, I also look at Leeds, because if someone looked at Leeds, they wouldn't be like, this is the prime location to have a really high performance environment, in the sense of it's really crummy, challenging weather, and it's like based around a city, and they have beautiful riding, but the pool doesn't look like a mecca of any sort, and they've done it. They've made it a really good environment to be in. And I've read the book The Talent Code. I don't know if you've read that book, but it really resonates with me with that. When you're setting up an environment for success, or having like a pocket of high performers, it's not based necessarily on like what looks the best or what access is. And I think we've done that a lot with our group. It's like people think life of a professional triathlete, maybe some are living more glamorously than others, but like Mona Lisa, like apartments are very bare bones, and it was the perfect place to train and thrive.
This is in Les Angles in France, where we train the basics, right? Yeah. So we were going to talk about, it was on the list for later, but yeah, so this visit to Leeds. So then you observed kind of the maybe vertical integration of how that program kind of works, from uni students to high performance, and so what do you think you can apply to your context? Is it that using the community, the wider sort of community, how do you sort of take inspiration from that to what you might do?
So I think leaning on the community has always been a big one for me, in the sense of like, I thought group rides I would always do them in Santa Cruz, California, when we were home for the winters. And I thought that they just helped me so much as an athlete, because they're so unpredictable. And I think sometimes when you get into a training group, you just there's like a rhythm to knowing each of your training partners and how you're going to go through a training session. Whereas in a group ride, like that's not really the case, or hasn't been the case in the ones that I've been doing. And I think that was super helpful, especially for myself, as I'm the cycling, I was always strong, but it was always the skills and the tactics that were a learning process for me. And I would say that I learned through the entire 10 years, and that was always a focus through the whole time that I was an elite athlete. And so like for me going into it, it's like leaning on now the group rides that we have here in Cary, and even basing like the schedule off of being able to do them, because I value them that much. But I also think the thing that I came away from Leeds from, and it's more of a longer term plan, is just being less selective with athletes and being more open to it not being so short term of an environment, but rather, if this is the environment that athletes want to be in, if they believe in what I'm doing and what like our coaching philosophy is here, then I want that to be open to them. And I actually spoke to an athlete who didn't quite fit our demographic. And at the end of the conversation, she had asked me what AUXO was, and I told her, I said it was for like athletes who are just like starting in the sport, and that we hope to accelerate and that we hope to move on. And she's like, oh, well, that doesn't sound like the spot for me then. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That how I communicated that definitely didn't sound like the spot for her, because she's a little bit further on in her development. But when I was thinking about it, I was like, this is the perfect spot, because the men who are in our program are like the perfect training partners, and equally so vice versa for them, like having her to like aspire to. So I think that conversation was super eye-opening to me, in the sense of I don't want it to, like, if this is the right place for people. And also I think it's hurt our pipeline a bit to have the selectivity, because people just don't see a place. Like, if you don't have a place to train in the US, in your like home country, it's a lot harder to commit to world triathlon racing, because it is expensive. It's already kind of like an elitist sport, and then it becomes even more so. And I think with looking at the lead structure, it just shows that like most of those athletes aren't funded who are being there. They're just invested in the environment, and they know, like, they kind of know the value of what they're getting, and they're paying to be there, but it's really an affordable amount of money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that what's interesting is like also what you're talking about. There's a stability to the environment, and people can train there while they're going to school or even after. But it sounds like it's a new project you're doing. So even your thoughts are evolving about how you're thinking about it, and even how you originally maybe told yourself the story. Even that is, as you're sort of getting your feet on the ground, you're finding even that is perhaps where it might go over 12 months or longer. It might change from what you initially thought. So like your story with this athlete about actually, on second thought, this is a good fit. Yeah, that's very interesting. But where do you think, where do you want it to go? I mean, even from that little evolution in the last few months, kind of what do you sort of see as the next steps? We talked before about the recruitment is a bit. I mean, it's always a topic programs like yours needs to focus on, because of course you need athletes and you want to talk about what you're doing, but you also have a funny sort of timeline there, I think, with the post-collegiate, in that it's not, normally we would say like the best time is, you speak to athletes in October, November, December, and then they start. But you can't exactly do that, according to what you were explaining. So maybe to talk through a little bit with this medium long-term plan, how do you sort of see this evolving?
I think I see it evolving slowly until after we have our second child, because just between the resources we have and then potentially being out for like a little bit with like the baby, I don't want to like start this bigger idea and then not be able, like, be stretched too thin and not be able to execute it in the way that I envision. So, but in general, like, 12-month plan, I think just considering more about having mainly just athletes who want to be here. And it'll probably still start out like a bit selective, in the sense of like, what value are you bringing? Are you committed? But also leaning a lot on this area, because this area, not thinking necessarily about the resources, but just about the community of people we have. I mean, there's 3 colleges that surround us, and actually there's more than that, who I think, like, 2 of our athletes right now, they're actually, well, 2 of them went to Duke. One of them graduated. One of them is still at Duke, and she's still committed full-time to school. And I'm like, wait, like, that's like, we have 5 athletes completely like on AUXO. So 2 out of 5 are from the area. I'm thinking, well, how many other athletes within this area would it be good? Because a lot of them are, I mean, NC State, UNC Chapel Hill, they both have really good Division I running programs. And then NC State also has a really good swimming program as well. And Duke has a very good swimming program. And Triangle Aquatic Center has a very good swimming program. And so I think it's really figuring out how all these different things that I can identify as being supplemental to our program how they can be intertwined, because even talking to Triangle Aquatic Center, which is where we swim, which has amazing facilities, they also have one of the top 3 teams in the country for club teams, and their club team is massive. Like, everybody's on wait lists. And I think from triathlon's perspective, that's such a limitation for triathletes, especially in the US, because there's some athletes who get involved with triathlon at a young age, but mostly, or not mostly, there's a lot of gaps, I would say, with youth triathlon programs in our country right now. So more athletes are trying to balance, like, swimming with a team, running with a team, riding, and you have coaches who, they want you to be a runner, they want you to be a swimmer, and so trying to balance those things. So when I was talking with Triangle Aquatic Center, they were like, well, what if we, this is eventual, but what if we had triathlete program where they would still swim with the club team, but it would be like 4 days a week, or less swimming than what most of the club athletes. And I was like, well, that would be amazing, because you're getting top tier swimming with triathlon, which normally it's balancing it is all hard. And so that's probably where I'm at right now, is like, while focusing on the group we have now and developing them and providing the daily training environment for them and having that all evolve, there's like ideas spinning for what this can evolve into. And I think I don't really have a time frame on it, because I want to do it well. And I think that was the challenge with starting this program is, I mean, you have to start somewhere. And I think no matter how much time I have, there's always going to be things that come up that I'm still learning on the go. But this was like a very like fast turnaround from having the idea of the program to really getting started. And so just actually doing it and having athletes here. And originally we were like, oh, we want athletes to start in January and like commit, but you realize pretty quickly that if they're applying in December and getting accepted, then most people have already committed to something. So in reality, we're starting in May, but we do have 2 athletes who have been here training with us. And at first I was like, oh, this isn't what I envisioned. And now I realize how great it's been to really be able to just kind of start and trial thing, like, not that they're trial athletes, but like get moving with only a couple people and kind of hash out things that it's much easier to do with 1 or 2 athletes than with 5 of them or more.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked, and you've been talking a lot about the structure stuff and like organizing things, which is absolutely, go back to our quote at the beginning, the behind the scenes stuff that you don't necessarily think about when you're competing and training. But how have you thought about now the coaching side of things? What you've had a lot of different experiences, you've observed a lot of people around the world over a decade plus of career. Where have you sort of started as, okay, now how do I want to coach? What do I want to be like? How will my training look like? What was your starting point there, and how have you sort of built it up to this stage?
Well, I've been lucky that I've been under a very good coach for 10 years now. So a lot is based off my experiences and your coaching style, in the sense that there's just so much of it that I feel like works. And when I look at like, oh, how much would I change or go away from that? Because a little bit of it was like, okay, I don't want to just like copy you, obviously. And I'm not, but the base is the same, because that's what I find to be successful. And even observing other programs, like, I find all of my coaches, well, not all of them, but most of my coaches that I've had in my more professional career, just thinking like collegiately, you, and then our master's swimming coach, JP here, you all have very similar coaching philosophies, I believe, and it's a lot based off keeping things simple, not overcomplicating, having the consistency, and things that like seem kind of basic, but as I'm coming into coaching, I'm realizing it's actually really hard to stay simple, because it doesn't, and even like, even recruiting athletes, I was like, well, nothing I'm saying really sounds that sexy or like creative, but it's what I believe in. And I think it's also the most sustainable way to be an athlete and actually to be a coach. I'm like, gosh, I can't even imagine like trying to fancy this up and have it sustainable for me or the athletes. And so I think I think that's been my main philosophy, and then trying to figure out like, okay, I pull a lot off of obviously my experiences. So for like the group rides and things being a standard part of our program, that was primarily based off of how valuable I found them. But at the same time, when we first have athletes coming here, there's going to be athletes who are not ready to be doing a group ride. And so being able to adapt to obviously what levels, like I'm not going to have athletes do a group ride when they're not ready. But I also think there's a little bit, you have to be comfortably uncomfortable. And I feel like that's how I progressed my best, is when I was on the limit, but I wasn't thrown into the wolves.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really interesting point. I mean, it's something that I suppose we've discussed and you're exploring, is that like intersection between psychology and like technical coaching, for lack of a better word, like physiology, technique, and mechanics. But then there's this interface with psychology and communication. So what have you sort of learned in this space so far, or practiced? I think that's maybe a good word to think about it.
I think the communication is definitely like an aspect that's going to be a work in progress for me, especially as a new coach. I feel like I need to speak more. And I already knew before I became a coach how much I appreciated how little you would say. And that wasn't, and it wasn't for lack of what your interest was or how engaged and involved and how bought in you were to my path. But like, there's a lot of things I feel like with over talking that can be detrimental. Like your athletes then not having the autonomy to like make their own decisions and have their own thoughts and see how they feel. Also, a big one for me is like projecting. Like if a workout is going, like if I'm looking at a workout, and especially as a remote coach, goodness, I do not like remote coaching. I don't think that's really for me to like focus on, because there's so little that you have background knowledge, or at least in person. But even so, it's like not being like, oh, that looked like a like hard swim, but rather being like, how did the swim go? Because I don't want to project onto the athlete if they were just like, oh, that was great, And so I think something I really appreciate is that you always, like, I can't think of so many conversations in very pivotal moments that were really extensive, or like you talking at me based. Like, I feel like it was guiding me to come to like my own conclusions. And some things that I think of specifically for this is like, when I'd be really nervous, and I can think of Super Tri Jersey would get me every time. And little things where you're like, just go back to your process. And for you, that's not a lot to say, but for me, that was all I needed, in the sense of, okay, that's like writing out my race, writing out my timeline. And you knew that, but so I think that's the biggest thing I'm learning, is just speaking less can hold a lot of value. And knowing when enough is enough to be said. And I also feel like you weren't, there was, sometimes it was hard as an athlete, but like, you didn't really go, like, you didn't just throw out like good jobs, or you were just very even. And again, that's something that my college coach was as well. And I think it makes me respect the coaches more, and also be able to reflect on like, well, what did this, like, I internally need to figure out the value of this workout to me. And it also made it so I had actually an athlete who had been applying to the program, and he was like, what's your like go-to workout? Like, what's the main session you have? Or like, what's the best one? And I was like, I think to your coaching and just how I was like, I have no answer for that. It doesn't matter what you do on one day. Like, it's the bulk of the work, and not just the bulk of the work for one training cycle, but literally years. So, um, so that's kind of communication wise what I've learned and what I hope to be.
It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, even just hearing you think about it, think out loud, and you think, like, how do you leave space for athletes to kind of solve their own problems without necessarily making mistakes, which, and it's that, like, it's just so much more powerful. I mean, that's what we kind of mean by process, isn't it? I mean, we throw around, you got to focus on your process, but like, what actually is that, and how do you not just I mean, you suppose contrast coaching styles like the command and control, or a lot of speaking at people versus saying enough and letting them figure out, and then watching them, and then coming back and guiding if they get on track. That's a different style. I mean, so, I mean, you could say that there's not a right or wrong, but you might also say that it's the most powerful when people are able to find the right way for themselves, and like letting go a bit of control to let people do that is actually a really important skill, and it's hard to do because you don't want people to make mistakes that are avoidable, but equally that's also how people learn, right? Like, it's one thing to be told, it's another thing to, oh yeah, I pushed too hard in that session and now I'm really fatigued the next day. Maybe I should have listened to the coach, or learned how to manage myself better. I mean, and that might take many repetitions. It's not going to necessarily happen in one go, but it's certainly, a challenge that is totally different than being on the receiving end of it, isn't it?
Well, and equally so, it's like, you also were never like, oh, I told you. Like, it wasn't like a, it was a learning thing, but always guided learning, and never harsh, I guess, which I think was really helpful as an athlete, and also like something with coaching. And I wouldn't say in general, like, I'm not, and my personality is rather even keel in the sense of like emotion wise, but I think it can be really hard on athletes when your coach is the one who's having big emotions while you are also probably having big emotions. And I can think of so many times during my career where, and this is like another piece of coaching that I've identifying, is just like, and maybe you can speak to this, the times when you're not actually confident, but you exude confidence for your athlete. I think I'm already feeling like those like circumstances. And I can think of, like, I don't know, maybe you felt completely confident in navigating when my dad died right before the Olympics, or what the right pathway for that was. But like, I think the fact that you never faltered, or like when I crashed before the World Championship, like, you never reacted in a big way. It's just kind of like, okay, like, we'll handle this. And that transcended to me. So like, now as an athlete, I've already think of that with training, even just making training decisions. It's like, no, I might not always know like which one is the better one. And you actually sent me an article about this very recently with the decision making, but like committing to the one that you go with, and knowing that it has right aspects of it, maybe more so, maybe it's about equal, it doesn't matter, but just making the decision is a piece of coaching. And I think that's also a part that I identify as super important.
I mean, yet quality of decision making, but I think you also touch on something there about balancing sort of autonomy and leadership, because sometimes, there are certain moments where athletes just want you to make a decision, and they don't want to have to come to a consensus. They want leadership. And there's other moments that it's like you have to give them some autonomy to make some decisions. And it's like recognizing which of those moments or not. I recall some of my most senior athletes, they really just wanted me to make a decision, and they didn't want to faff around and, just tell us where to go and what to do. And then
Yeah.
another time, yeah, you guys decide, or you decide yourself. And yeah, it's like creating space for that to happen and recognizing those moments, I think. That somebody had said at one point, it's like the way to think about it is like, what are teachable moments? What are moments that come along that could be an opportunity to teach what the right or wrong thing is. And it's like being able to discern those and like see, step back a little bit and see what kind of moment is this, and particularly when you need to change something, around safety or weather, like that's often, a situation where you might, we're not going to do the group ride today. Maybe it's a bit not the right conditions because you don't want to take that risk. Or I mean, there's so many. They're every day and all around us, right? And recognizing and being present. But I mean, certainly, the personality stuff is interesting as well, because then it makes me think. You talked about kind of knowing yourself a little bit of like, then it makes me think, what kind of athletes do you think that you would connect best with, or have you thought about how do you manage athletes that are more challenging for you? Because you end up with sort of a spectrum, don't you? And some that might be a really good match in terms of similar personality characteristics, but then you don't always get to know that at the beginning, do you? Like, you don't really know somebody until they're really tired or stressed or something happens, and then, oh, there's another side. So imagine you're in the early stages of that side of things, but how have you thought about what would be the type of athletes or characteristics that you think they would work best with, or are you more open on that, like in terms of how you might approach different types of people?
I suppose I'm a bit open, but one of the main things that I'm still working on, I wouldn't say I've necessarily figured out my way of handling this, but having the athletes that buy into the program, I think you've gone through quite a few different transitions of our training program, in the sense of when I first started, all of the athletes were choosing to be coached by you and really investing in the group, I would say. Whereas I feel like the difference with the USA Triathlon program is that we will offer a lot of resources that maybe athletes won't necessarily get if they're on their own or with another coach. And so I want the athletes to want to be here for the environment, for the teammates, for my coaching style, not for the things that they're getting that make it easier for them. While that's like such a benefit, that doesn't seem like the right athlete to be here. And so I think like I've gotten lucky so far in that the athletes we're communicating with, the athletes I've started coaching, they buy into me as their coach, what's to come as the training environment. And I'm really excited about that. But I do see that in the future I'll have others who may not be the same way. And I think something I learned, and it was a big conversation point with you in the beginning of the formative phases of the group, is like, how do you know they're the right athletes, and what level of challenging is just like an athlete being an athlete, and every athlete bringing their own set of challenges or more specific demands. But at what point does that fall towards being toxic for the group, toxic for us as coaches, and even for the athletes who are the ones who might be instigating like the challenging parts? And I think something that will be very hard for me is to kind of like recognize that, but toxicity to the group is a big part that I would like to hold true to this program as not like, if it's like, okay, well, if you feel this way, if you're bringing these vibes to the group, this isn't the place for you. Like you need to go find somewhere where you feel like is a better fit. And equally so, like, I think there's autonomy, and like, I remember I would bring up things about training in our like in what you would schedule for me and plan for me, and maybe say like, oh, can we do skills, or can we add something, or I'm too tired for this, or we'd like change a little bit. And completely open to that for an athlete, but an athlete who wants to change the whole way of my coaching style, then, or like do things, everything different or everything their way, or doesn't want to be a part of the group. Those are like kind of ones where it's like, okay, this isn't the environment for you. And so mainly, yeah, simply athletes who buy into this and are draft league world triathlon focused in a more simple, less.
Well, although that said, I've found great value from some athletes in training groups over the years who were doing different distances, but were great for the group. Like, like with the right,
Yeah.
bringing energy or positivity or just work ethic, over the years. So it's like keep open to that. But those are great points that you say. Those will be some of the most challenging moments, I think. If you think forward and. I don't know, maybe I related probably not regrets exactly, but learning points is when I recognized a situation like that, but I didn't intervene or I didn't know how, or I was afraid to intervene soon enough. And then the biggest worry, as you say, is how it impacts others. And then you could sort of see quickly how a group can fall apart if a negative energy goes through, and it impacts everyone, or a toxicity of behavior. There was moments where I thought, well, I need this person in the group because maybe they're a really good athlete, maybe just business wise they're earning prize money, and then realizing, oh, but they're having such a negative impact on others or on you. Certainly myself. I mean, I think a lot of what the athletes see, that you don't necessarily see how much energy that costs behind the scenes, right? Maybe you don't see it face to face, but afterwards, it can be incredibly difficult to deal with because so much of coaching, similar to teaching, it's giving energy, it's being available, it's often it feels one directional, even though you do get something back, but it's often one directional, so you don't necessarily see that. But those are some those very challenging moments of like, because you have to commit to each other in the start, and you do your best to make sure that the athlete susses out what you're offering and you as a person, because you make a great point. You want them primarily to choose the environment for building a relationship with you and the community that you're building. Whereas what you don't want is, especially when you have access to more resources, that they're choosing your group because it's the funded option. It's the thing that's free or low cost, or that has all the frills that they think that they might want. But if it's going to succeed, it's because you can commit to each other and build a relationship with each other, right? And that's the challenging part, is to like for you to figure that out, but also to push the athletes to think about that too, right? It's like when you're discussing, you're asking questions and you to each other, but you want the athlete to choose for the right reason. And I always thought that's why the private groups have something a little different, because the athlete has to invest. So it's like and the ones that invested, like literally reached into their pocket. I always thought is a little bit of an advantage over ones where it was, whenever I did something that was a partnership with a federation, never quite had the same connection, even though it was 90-something% the same, but it was missing something. And I think that's one of the challenges for programs that have more resources. You get good side, more stability, more structure, more support. But this side that you've got to suss out is you want people to choose you for the right reasons, and not just because it's the one that has the most support, the program with the most support. So that will be challenging to sort that out moving forward. Maybe not so much now, but over time, yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because part of the application for AUXO Collective, the very last question was, are you interested in funded or non-funded options? And I thought something that was pretty cool was majority of the athletes said yes, interested in non-funded options. And that to me was eye-opening, in the sense of it's not all just athletes looking to benefit from a cushioned program financially. And it probably is like also been a formative thing to know in the sense of continuing to build our group is are interested in having the environment of being a part of the daily training environment, whether they need to put something into it or not, which it's good to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as you're kind of working in through all of these challenges and problems and solutions that you're coming up with, it does make me think, like, when did you have the idea that you could be interested in coaching? Was this the opportunities that came at the right time, at the right moment, or did you think some years ago this could be something that you might be interested in doing? I mean, where did that spark come from? And well, it makes me think now, like, how do you think about what you bring to the role, your strengths? Because I mean, I know you have a lot of strengths, but I'm wondering how you think about that. Like, because strengths meaning not just, well, you had some success as an athlete, but the way that you approach things and how you might think about things that can add value to others. But so where did the spark come from? Where, was it the right place at the right time, or was there, when you were competing, did you think about it, you might be interested in this, or were you really focused on your own performance at the time?
I honestly never really considered coaching during my career. And even it kind of was more the spark at the right time, I feel like, and also feeling like there was this gap, especially in the US. And I was like, someone has to do it. And I don't mean that in like a negative way of not being interested in coaching, but I felt like my knowledge base and my experience as an athlete and how I am as a person. I mean, I never thought about coaching. However, my undergraduate degree in college is teaching. And I was always interested in teaching. I actually thought, and I was more passionate about teaching teachers how to teach, or in general, like maybe like coaching education more and kind of reaching more people, because as a singular coach, your reach isn't as far as if you're, and like actually what you're doing right now a lot with your podcast, or with like what you're doing with Tommy, is trying to help others learn this knowledge base and learn what it takes to be a good coach. And I think that's hard. That's really hard to get. I mean, I took the level 1 coaching certification for USA Triathlon, but most of what I've learned is through other coaches and talking to other coaches and observing. And one of my strengths, I feel like, coming into coaching from an athlete, I don't think all professional athletes will make great coaches. And I think there's so much for me to learn, but I feel like I had this awareness as an athlete, and not just in myself, but in others. I liked observing my own process. I liked observing others' processes. I liked watching you as a coach, and I still wish I like had taken so much more in of that side. But I feel like I've always been interested in sharing what I've learned and trying to, it's not a secret that I was trying to hold on to because I've been successful, but just thinking that I can help other people with their process. And probably, as I was talking to you early on, I'm more confident in that aspect. And then the actual training aspect of like implementing a training plan, I was really worried that lapse in knowledge, or just the fact that I hadn't concentrated on that part for so many years, would be a deficit. But I feel like the way I've trained as an athlete and the way like I am as a person, and just reaching out to people when I'm uncertain has been really helpful in guiding me in the bit of the transition.
Well, you make a great point, and I often talk about, in coach education programs, the traditional ones, they talk about, technical knowledge, physiology, literally technique and mechanics or transitions, stuff that you got to do. But, the differentiator, you might say, in coaching is relational. It's psychology. It's people. It's the stuff you're talking about there, the process. And I hadn't thought about it before in this way, but you were and you did thrive on refining your process as an athlete, really, like with the way that you would reflect, your training diaries, how you commented on things, how you'd prepare and put yourself in a race mentality and remember what you wanted to do, like all that process stuff. I mean, I still use some of that stuff that you sort of modeled with other athletes, because I think it is really effective. So, I mean, that is a great reflection from yourself on a strength that you refined in your own way over your career, but that's very applicable to others. I think of you know the knowledge that you gained of having refined that yourself. I think is because there's some things, training wise, people respond in different ways. They have different ideas. The physiology stuff, you could learn that. That's just information that's out there. It's like, well, how do you apply that to the people in front of you, and how do you create space for them to figure it out? But that process stuff, that's a great reflection.
Thanks.
I loved your checklist. I mean, just recently thinking about that, because it prompts people to think themselves. Like, you as a coach, you can tell them, remember this is what you have to do. This position in T1, da, 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 da. You could do that, but it's much better if they come up with what they think are the right steps for them, either to prepare for a competition or training, and then you can check that and talk about it. Then you can talk about it together, right? I mean, that's kind of what a good coaching process is. But I think that's a good one. But what other sort of formative experiences have you had that maybe it's early days to draw on some of these, but then that you apply, you're thinking, as you experience training, apply back to your coaching? I mean, things that come to mind are like how you manage intensity. It could be maybe not yet, but like how you manage health issues and decisions around that, because that's like inevitable that you'll have to deal with, people that have become ill or niggles, like this kind of stuff. Like those are really challenging things as well. But is there anything that stands out at the moment for when you think about your coaching of your own experiences or decision points, that you had to face, that then you can start to apply that, or maybe that will come down the road, if not any big ones yet?
I mean, a big part that I appreciated in like our training and how we would do things is doing a lot by feel and less like having guidelines maybe for pacing or power, but never really having it prescribed to a T for the paces. And so applying that as a coach, in my head, it's genius, but it takes maturity on like the athlete's point, and there's like a learning curve in a sense. But I see that so helpful on the physical and mental side of things as an athlete. And again, I think a lot in sustainability. I mean, even as an athlete, you knew like I was super robust physically. It would be probably mentally that I would wear down before I wore down physically. And I guess something taking into being a coach is, I think a lot of people can train super well and do really hard work. How that translates onto the course and how they manage that is, I find, more the key. Like if people looked at my training, most of my training, I would say didn't look super impressive. And I don't know if you would consider me more of a trainer or a racer, but I think generally speaking, it was just being able to be prepared and be ready for competition, and in a way that was, again, I feel like I used the word too many times in this conversation already, but sustainable, so that over my career, like the reason my career was pretty robust in its nature throughout that timeline was just because I was able to manage the training. I was able to determine my energy. So as a coach, that's really something I'm wanting to be aware of. And for like the training as you feel, I feel like that helps with that aspect, because you're not looking at training as pass fail. And that's kind of how I see race. That's how I got to with racing as well, is when I first started, I think I was like, well, I can be on the podium. The podium is the goal. Even though people would say focus on the process, it didn't really click. And it simultaneously happened that obviously I'm getting stronger, but also my mental side of things really changed going into 2019, Whereas like, let's see what I can do racing. And I think that's something I take from my athletes is like, we're not like, we'll learn especially for these athletes, because currently my athletes are more in their development stage. And I think we're learning here. Like, we're going into races. We can learn to be tactical, but you need to learn to be confident, and you need to learn to win, and you need to learn to race and see where your limit basically is. And then we work from there. Like, we're not always going to race in this way, but like, it's something that resonated when I first started triathlon. Not my first coach, but I only had a few coaches, but like before you, and the coach was like, okay, like you're going to get on, like you're going to swim, and then we're going to ride the bike, conserve energy for the run, like come down to the run. And as you know, I don't race that way, and I hate racing that way. And I really never did race that way. But if I did, if I had started out that way, then I would never have known what I was capable of. And I think I'm talking in like a lot of different, like I've gotten off of your initial question here a bit.
It's all right.
But I think there's just sustainability, confidence in racing, finding their process and being able to do that by themselves, and really balancing as a coach, as we've spoken about already, wanting to be able to guide them and then obviously feel supported and confident in the coaching that they're receiving, but also confident in their own decision making, so that when I'm not there, or when I'm not able to provide, like when you're in a race, you're in it by yourself. like you need to make your decisions. Being able to foster that independence for them.
Yeah, no, those are important qualities, because I mean, I can think of, and I'm sure you observed and maybe experienced some environments that seem to tend towards a kind of dependence on the coach, or dependence on external factors. And it seems that is a kind of situation that can create a fragility. Like if you're dependent as an athlete on others to make decisions, or you don't learn those skills yourself, then you're going to be in situations where you don't have that feedback, or maybe you just haven't developed those skills. And I mean, it's the same, I think, as you say in training. Like, it's the training on feel. It's there's a meme, I think it's called the midwit meme, where when at this, it's got the inverted U graph. It's got like a picture of somebody on the left that they're just starting, and everything is very simple to them. Then you're in the middle, everything is very complicated, lactate, pace, watts, da da da. And then on the other side, on the far end of the graph, it's the expert, and it's very simple again. And it's so tempting in this moment to be stuck in the middle, because that's where the feeling of like, this is how you're supposed to do things in high performance. So this is how you're supposed to develop, is to be in that middle. I think there's a lot of kind of push towards that. And people don't develop the skills eventually to simplify it again. And, our brains are the supercomputers that take into account everything. We don't need AI. We've got I in here. We've got it. But you have to develop it, don't you? Like, it's a skill to develop and to manage that. And not to say that the information or data is not useful, but you have to develop the muscle of this kind of thinking and decision making, and self-knowledge, and that has to be embedded in the program if you want it to be there when it matters the most, as in the long term, to be independent athletes who are still coachable, guidable, but are able to put themselves in situations where they trust themselves and they're confident in themselves to do the right thing, without somebody there in their ear necessarily to tell them. Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I feel like that was one of the biggest superpowers of just being able to, again, feel like there were sessions I was disappointed with as an athlete, but never like that was a worthless session, and it was all like, even if I wasn't hitting, I mean, after a while, what paces you want, like without being prescribed paces. It doesn't matter. Like you have you have an awareness.
Yeah.
But still being able to see, I think, as an athlete, like still being able to find what you got out of that, feeling that way, doing those numbers or doing that pace, whatever it is. It's like, okay, well, it might not have been, I mean, with swimming, like, especially like I could be swimming like a 108 for 100 meters, or I could be swimming like a 112, 114, and being able to come away and not just be like, throw my arms up and be mad or anything like that, but just like, oof, hard day. Like, onwards we go.
Oh, that is a great reflection. It makes me think, I mean, I'm sure you will come across these kind of situations as you're going along, but you can learn so much from the people you're working with. It's like it's that two-way as well. And I think you are a very good and consistent trainer, and you had like some moments of really high quality, but you weren't like somebody that could tolerate a huge amount of workload. I think your sweet spot was, in fact, maybe even a little less in some respects than others, but it was like the confidence to do that, and that was good, and that worked, and you weren't lesser because you trained a few hours a week less, because the confidence to be able to do that, because you will be eventually in situations, I'm sure, and other coaches will recognize this, where you're like tempted to want to do more and more, and the better athletes you get, you're going to push them even harder, and in fact, well, that might be counterproductive, and that could be the wrong thing. And I've often talked about like the confidence to do a little less, the confidence to do the right amount. I think that was, I think once we figured that out and had sort of self-acceptance, also for me too, but for you, accepting, okay, this is kind of how you're going to best function. And in particular, I think you are probably sensitive to mental fatigue as well, because we often talk like it was hard to keep engaged all the time. You would need some days where you just needed to switch off, right? And that was what you needed at that moment. But it's like also recognizing that it's not a bad thing. That's a good thing to recognize that in you as the person that would benefit most from that. And it's not just like feeding your ego to do more and harder and always be great and always be engaged, and like actually seeing that. It's one of the benefits, I suppose, in a group like you were in, is you could see also your training partners having those kind of days too, right? And even the most consistent metronome athlete like Mario Mola, occasionally have days where he needs to go at the back or get out of the pool or get or not run, or and you could see that as well. But I mean, I'm sure you'll bring those experiences forward with you as well, or reflections on how you observed others, not only your own experience.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I was so proud of my Katie specials, but like it took us a little bit to get there. Katie specials are like very short 3K easy swims, and it would be choice for me. And we started doing it because I think my swimming just kind of became, because I didn't have probably a combination of physical and mental energy to like kind of just like push through the swims. It just kind of like flatlined, where I wasn't getting the intense days weren't as intense as they should have been or could have been. And as soon as we changed it, I feel like I was like right back, because the physical reset, but probably more so just the mental side. Like I was like, okay, I'm ready for these. And I think for coaching, it's like, that is definitely something I almost think it's something I need to be aware of on being like too conservative side of things. Because I've been I see it as like, again, one of my like superpowers as an athlete, but like, I don't ever want that to become a limiter for my athletes. And for right now, I think, especially with where most of these athletes are, like being conservative is okay, but and I think that's like one of the challenges of coming into like coaching is I don't want to project how I was as an athlete onto my athletes. And while I recognize that as like a balance that needs to be had, or I think even observing some of like my teammates, like I feel like what I've seen is kind of like, okay, like too soon, too fast, too hard, all the time. Or not all the time, but just like too much. And so kind of taking the awareness and figuring out how to make that the best balance of those different worlds. And I think that's like going to be super challenging to do.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of the mistakes that any coach is likely to make, I think they're generally in the doing too much too soon, and that resulting in injury or illness or niggles or needing time off. So I was like, conservative is good. I probably worry more about athletes coming into coaching who were extraordinarily high workload trainers, and then they may realize that others without those talents and skills may not be able to do that. And if that is their experience, they're going to find out through some challenging situations where, I mean, I think it's a heuristic of like, if in doubt, leave it out is pretty rock solid, like in terms of an instinct thing to follow. But yeah, I think it is a strength that you can bring. There will be athletes who need more stimulus than you did at certain points. I'm sure there will be, and there'll be athletes. I mean, as you said, you were fairly robust physically in terms of injuries, but others who are not, right? And they'll be much more sensitive to niggles or pain, or just have things that, well, they may not be able to do as much because of that, and you'll have to deal with that. But I mean, I find the athletes who are, it's harder to tell when they're tired. They're the more challenging ones, because it can creep up, and I've had a few like this that they're doing such amazing work, and then they get to races and you just don't perform how you thought, and then you realize actually they were really tired, but they were just doing it. They were just surviving, but it wasn't obvious. Whereas I felt with you, it was, you could tell, but in a way that was easier. But it just shows the spectrum of people that you end up dealing with, and like you need like the skills to be able to see that, and like how do you take somebody that's a super consistent trainer but maybe is just working a little too hard most of the time, but not really breaking down, not needing to miss training, and then they just don't perform. Well, those are some challenging ones. I mean, I'm sure you'll face that, but it makes me think of, you're early into this, but is there anything, you look back on your career from put your coaching hat on, was there advice that you would have given yourself now? Or, I mean, maybe it's too soon to say, but like when you look back at yourself, or maybe someone else, when you sort of look back at your training partners that you had, is like some advice that comes to mind that you would give yourself, Katie, 10 or 15 years ago at the earlier stages of your career?
Honestly, I feel like I had such an idealistic career and even a pathway that it's really hard for me, even as like when I'd get the question to me, oh, what was your journey like into triathlon? I almost kind of hated saying it because I knew it wasn't going to be majority of other people's journey, because I just felt like when I was younger, it was just about participation all through basically high school. And my parents, they just wanted me to be involved, but it wasn't high performing. When I got to college, I was evolving, thought I was at the top of the spectrum in the sense of like where I was going to get as an athlete. So I was continuing to learn, but I never at that point really thought I was going to be a professional. So then when I got into triathlon, it was more just like, as you described the meme, I'm like, yep, that was pretty much what we did. Because I got into it at a high, and I was performing at a high level really early on in my career, even though I just started. But I had no idea really what I was doing, took no ownership in it. And I feel like that was so beneficial to me in the sense of like not really being aware of what it, like when I won my first World Cup, I'm like, cool. Like I didn't really know that was pretty good. And so it wasn't probably until, I would say like the hardest part was probably like getting into my first Olympics, and like I was still more like, now I was on the podiums more frequently, so that I was seen as a podium contender going into 2016, but like mental awareness and like things wasn't there. But it's hard to say I wanted, and my Olympics at that Olympics ended up being disappointing to me. I was 18th, but I can't say that I would want to change that because it was so impactful for how the rest of my career went, in like just realizing all the things that I needed to change. So I suppose like, yeah, I think my advice is probably pretty much what I've done, but it'd just be for relative other athletes. It's just be open-minded to what you can achieve, but like be playful, enjoy the process. And I know that's such a like everybody says that type thing, but it's so true of be where your feet are, kind of like when I wanted to get better, like I for world rankings, I went 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and then Olympic medal. And so like, that's not your standard trajectory, but there was something, I know a lot of people would be like, well, let's be first. But there was something to me so beautiful about like seeing that incremental growth. And I think when I look at other people, it's like wanting to skip the growth phase and just be at the top. And I can't say that it was super purposeful, but I feel like something I did really well as an athlete was just like being proud of each step. Rather, like I can think of some athletes who have finished on the World Triathlon Series podium and still been like not really taken that in, and they'd never done it before. And I'm like, that's a big, like, to finish on the World Series podium at the end of the year, like, be proud. And so I guess that's part of it, is like always be hungry, but also be proud.
No, you've the number of really good points there that I like. One of them is, well, never wish you had a different experience, because you wouldn't be who you are now if you didn't have the experiences you had, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very good reflection. And also, yeah, being where your feet are. I mean, there's a reason why we have these sort of, they are cliches, but they're hard fought experience of what process is about. And the other thing that just comes to mind as you're explaining is you're right. Not everyone is going to have that progression that you had. I remember speaking with an athlete who was in the U23 category, and at the same time as Emma Lombardi was in the U23. And then they watched her take a huge leap in the next 2 years. And this athlete was quite frustrated because they weren't on that trajectory, different trajectory, but no less valid for them that they needed to do the steps they needed to do. And, well, they would like to do what Emma did. I mean, that's not everyone's experience and, like, acceptance about that. Because I think you had a bit of that also, step by step, unlocking what the next one would be. And if you didn't go through Rio, as you said, you know, how would you get to the point where you got to for Tokyo without, you know, experiencing that? And okay, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? And even though your progression was nice and linear, others will be different than that, and sort of seeing that. And I mean, I suppose that again, that's the also coaching, unlocking those steps of different people and how they'll experience things.
Well, and I think like when it came to Tokyo, it was really cool because I remember thinking like within the race, there were so many like different points within that race that I was thinking about past experiences that I had prepared me for in that moment. So like it was rainy, like I've done this before. Like there was like going through different technical sections with like Brits. It's like, oh, we did this at Leeds. Like also in Leeds where like I was leading and then Georgia like passed me and she ended up winning, but I stayed like basically the same amount of header. Kind of happened the same thing again actually, but like be ready. And I think like the awareness as a coach is like trying to coach my athletes to a point where they're as reflective and as like process oriented. One of the younger ladies that I coach, we were getting ready for one of her first races with me as her coach. And it's like, okay, like what's your process? Like, how do you think about this race? Like, what are your goals? She's like, oh, I've never really thought about it before. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to think about it. But I think like that's something that I feel like brings value. And even when I look at like a lot of high performing athletes, like so many of them journal, so many of them reflect, so many of them are very in tune to their process. Very few are just like winging it and having fun. Like I can think of some athletes who you just look at and you're like, they're just having a ball out there competing. But there's a lot of athletes who that it's like a lot more intentional.
Doesn't come as naturally necessarily. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to finish on this this whole journey. It's been super to hear your sharing and reflections, and I think it's one of the strengths that you bring. I think is your curiosity about the process is totally reflective, at least to me so far in this next steps for you in your career, and you're like asking questions, not afraid to seek advice and help you, but you're also putting your own stamp on things there, step by step. That it's not just doing what you did or what you have been inspired in others, because it's got to fit your context and where you're at. But equally, you've been, I think, open, because I think about that challenges kind of currently is like being confident enough to ask questions and to seek answers, and not just want to put a front up that you've got it all figured out. Because to me, that's a big red flag for me when I observe others. Is like, I know people don't believe they have it all figured out, but they act like it. And to me, that is, they've got a wall up where I feel like you're able to absorb information from all around you and try to figure it out yourself in the same way that you did as an athlete. So I think in that way, I'm sure that you will be successful, and I'm looking forward to following where this project goes. And over the next, it's not just LA 2020, it's kind of beyond that, isn't it? It's one of the things to think about, but this is not just specifically for LA. I think this is a long-term project. So looking forward to following where it goes. I guess you have an Instagram account to follow a little bit. I think you're not a huge posting a bunch of stuff on social media about this yet. It's probably too early for you to feel like that, but people can follow along and look forward to seeing where it goes from here.
Yeah, they can follow AUXO Collective, and thankfully we'll have someone who's taking over that, because yes, I have not been doing much. To be fair, it is in its preliminary stages, but no. And I just, thank you for having me on the podcast. I've obviously been listening to a lot of your podcasts recently, and I was glad they came back up. And when you were asking for questions, I sent you like 5. So I think, just as a coach, I'm really excited, but I'm also very thankful for having a great coach for my career. So thank you for really, I wouldn't want to be a coach if I didn't have a good one, probably. Or maybe it's the opposite too, but
it's very, very kind of you to say, Katie. And it's one of the things that I enjoyed, is that you're somebody that gives energy back, and I hope you find some athletes like that do the same for you, because it helps keep going, because you don't always feel that connection that we had, and I hope for you that you'll find some similar ones for you that keep that spark going. And I look forward to following. So thanks very much.
Thanks.
So that was a great discussion with Katie on her journey into coaching and her reflections on how she's going to put together her program and the long-term view of this project. To support this podcast, sign up for my Substack, the Real Coaching Substack. You can either subscribe, or it's free to get background in writing and future sharing of periodization, of behind the scenes. share these podcasts with somebody that might benefit, leave a review and ask questions. Appreciate the support. It's motivating to keep producing them. On to the next one.